Hi everyone. So in this audio, I am going to deal with the distinctive use of punctuation in the short story The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. Generally using punctuations appropriately, the writer would convey his or her message systematically. Such important and vital linguistic tool got little attention concerning the stylistic analysis of literary texts. In his masterpiece, Edgar Allan Poe used punctuation marks skillfully. His style required him to use many punctuation to bring the reader to the arena of the murder, and more importantly, the mental state of the narrator. Through such punctuations, the reader is enabled to see by the eye of his or her mind what the murderer acted and or felt. Digging the text deeply by using this cohesive tool, several mysteries could be revealed. In a very short text, Poe has used many punctuations to clarify the feelings and sufferings of the hero. He described the pauses, the interruptions, and contradicted ideas that took place in the story. There are two types of punctuations: terminal punctuations, which appear at the end of sentences, and internal punctuations that are used within sentences. The available terminal are the full stop, exclamation, and question mark. On the other hand, the internal punctuation are the comma, dash, semicolon, apostrophe, colon, parenthesis, and the hyphen. The dash, the second most frequent punctuation, was used 135 times in the story. In general, the use of this punctuation is highly limited in the texts, since it is not, for example, as common as a full stop and comma. Instead of that, it was used many times in Poe's story. As mentioned in the previous section, it is used to interpret the flow of the ideas with another thought. Interrupting his ideas a lot, the narrator gives a negative impression about his mental health. This punctuation is used in a dual form, which could either emphasize certain words or phrases or represent a long pause or hesitation in the spoken language. By the end of the story, the sound of the beating heart is again heard by the narrator, despite the fact that he already killed the old man, which increases the state of paranoia the narrator is going through. It is then that the punctuation mark of the dash is mostly used throughout the text. Yet the sound increased. And what could I do? I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. In both of these examples, the action is described first, followed by the thoughts of the narrator. Thus the sound increased, and this made him wonder on what to do to mute the sound. Also his fears made him breathe in deeply, but the officers next to him remained oblivious of what he was going through. His illogical reasoning is depicted via the many dashes in the entire paragraph of his confessional address to the police officers. At this point, the narrator keeps on repeating the noise steadily increased, and agonizes himself with the thought that the policeman must have also heard the sound and suspected him. The repetition of the word louder and the last louder in capital indicate the seemingly increased volume of the sound. A succession of interrogative sentences, example, what could I do, why would they not begin, and the exclamatory statements, they heard, they suspected, they knew, reveal the frenzied delusion in the narrator's mind. His heightened sensitivity to sound, connected with his guilt feelings, ultimately overcomes him. Throughout the linguistic devices, repetition, parallelism, heavy use of question and exclamation marks, we seem to be able to see and experience the narrator's anxiety and hysterical emotions at this point. It could be stated then that the exclamation mark is used to display the hysteria within his mind, which could either represent the thought process of the narrator or the statements he loudly says to the officers. "Oh God, what could I do?" foamed, I raved, I swore, I grew louder, louder, and louder. These exclamation marks portray the hate and fright of the man, and are within the text not enclosed by quotation marks, as opposed to the speech directed to the officers. "Villains, dissemble no more, I admit the deed." And yet the most important reason behind the murder was his fear of the old man's eyes. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. Marked at the end of these phrases by exclamation marks, this depicts his attempt to find any logic in that these eyes were the reason behind his deed. The man was obsessed that he may be seen by others due to his feelings of guilt, which is here represented by the eyes of the old man. He himself stated that he had never wronged me, he had never given me insult. He had never given me insult. Nevertheless, once he developed this idea in his mind, it haunted him ever since. I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. The use of exclamation mark is mostly at the end of the story, at the point of highest tension where the climax of the story or of the tale lies. In only the last 2 paragraphs, 25 exclamation marks could be counted. This is when the man loses himself completely and is torn between his own delusion and reality. Finally, the hyphen is used 2 times only within the story. The first time in the title of the story itself, the telltale heart, showing that tale in the tale is going to be mostly inside the heart, the subconscious, in which the biggest part of the events is taking place within the self of the narrator. Having such compound words in the title might also indicate the psychological duality of the narrator that made him doing contradictory things or even ask and answer himself. The second instance in which the hyphen is used is blood spot, in which the narrator, after having committed the crime, proudly stated that there was nothing to wash out, hyphen, no stain of any kind, hyphen, no blood spots. Full stop. The many common punctuation mark in English came as the third frequent one. It is used to end declarative sentences. Most of these sentences were long and complex. However, he mentioned successive simple and short sentences in which there was no other punctuation when he tried to explain the motives behind his crime as not being evil and or greedy. I'll read the quote once again. Object there was none, passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. End of quote. So the same thing happened when he simply tried to defend himself that there was a reasonable motive behind his aggressive behavior and that he is not mad. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing, but you should have seen me. So this may reflect that these ideas were said aloud with a sane mind, and thus they needed or they need not to be elaborated nor complex. Moreover, short sentences also add to the tension in the story, since short sentences could build the feeling of haste and fear, just as Poe used in his Telltale Heart. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. Again, short sentences follow one another, and though the officers had not noticed anything, panic starts to take over, even though he fools himself into thinking at first that he was singularly at ease. Intense anxiety grabs hold of him. The question mark. The question mark is used 10 times within the story. The first time is already in the first paragraph. Nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? So the way this sentence had been said already depicts his nervous demeanor, wondering though why the reader might call him mad. This again stated further in the story, and have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the sense? This is his answer to what may wrongly be perceived as madness, which is the over-acuteness of the sense. It could indeed be true that his anxiety caused him to be over-obsessive on the sounds he hears, the beating of the heart, and the evil eye he saw on the old man. Both he were unable to deal with for a long period of time, until he finally decided to tie the knot and make an end to his extreme agony by committing the hideous murder. Further in the story, the man met the officers. I smiled, for what had I to fear? At death seems to be more self-encouragement rather than a question. Trying to come over as strong and ignorant of the murder of the old man, he decided to smile and pretend there was nothing to fear. Yet, while he was still next to the officers, the sound increased, and what could I do? Asking himself what he could do to mute the sounds, in fear the others may hear it. He was unaware that these sounds may only be present in his own mind, or might be even stemming from his own heart. It became so extreme that he started wondering, why would they not be gone? Impatient to see them leave, as he kept asking himself, was it possible they heard not? His final outrageous statement clearly indicated that he believed they actually did hear the sounds, and that the only outcome was to give up and confess. Parenthesis is also found within this short story. I ended the lantern, oh, so cautiously. Okay, so parenthesis, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. Here Poe uses parenthesis to explain why the speaker ended the lantern so cautiously. In another example, his room was as black as pitch with the thick darkness. Parenthesis, for the shutters were closed fastened, through fear of robbers. Through fear of robbers. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. Poe explains why was so dark in the bedroom and give some additional information about the old man. So to conclude, in order to portray his mental disorder, this mental disorder, Poe not only used words to bring over his story, but he strongly focused on the unique usage of punctuation marks as their importance in transferring a message just as strong as words could be. Although they usually are used in order to pause and depict the relationship between words and phrases, Poe managed to use these punctuation marks themselves as meaningful and significant devices to narrate the story. Through them, the characters' hesitation, insistence, fear, anxiety, and madness were all portrayed efficiently, which could never have been clear otherwise. So I came to the end, or this, let's say, audio comes to its end. Thank you for listening.